Besides Nelson Mandela, apartheid, and more recently the Vuvuzela, Romanian people don't know much about South Africa. What is that we should know more about your country?
I think there are lots of things to know and love about South Africa. Firstly, and there's a commonality here between Romanians and South Africans. We are a very hospitable people. We are a very, very friendly people. We are very bright people in terms of our cultural attire. If you look at the Romanian cultural attires, traditional attires, and you look at what I'm wearing, I could easily be a Romanian woman. So that is one thing, and it's very important because that then makes breaking the barriers between people easier. The second thing that you would know about us is we're the country that has talked about Ubuntu, which means the love of humanity, the love, respect of humanity, irrespective of your status in society, irrespective of your class, of your race, of your gender. And for us is a critical thing that we'd like to export, because if people learn to love one another despite their differences, then we think we can build a better world. Thirdly, we're a rich country, especially in mineral resources. Never mind that at the moment we have not been able to exploit that to the best. If you look at the minerals like gold, like platinum, we're in the top 10. And we also are very strong in coal. In terms of our financial systems, we're the strongest in the whole world. And therefore, I think that there's a lot to know and to love about South Africa.
One such economic problem is unemployment, which is a huge issue in Europe also. How is your country fighting this plague?
We as government have felt that it's not anything that can be resolved by government alone. So we've called on the private sector, on the public sector, and on NGOs for all of us to pool our resources together. One of the things that government is doing is what we called public works, which means that we've got huge infrastructure development. And in that infrastructure development, we employ a lot of people, especially young people. Public Works program helps in two ways. One, it creates jobs for many South Africans, educated or uneducated, skilled or unskilled, because of the various jobs that people would be able to do. Number two, it improves on our infrastructure, building of roads, of schools, of hospitals. So that is one area that we are focusing on. The second one is also trying to give skills, especially to our young people, because some of the most unemployed are young. We are engaged, for instance, with Romania and other countries to look at what kind of exchanges we can have in terms of skills development. We have embarked on a very strong program to empower the young people for them to start their own small businesses. Now in South Africa, one of the key words that is going around the use is entrepreneur. Never mind that most of us can't even pronounce it, but is to get business skills so that people can run programs or businesses for themselves, small projects, and even family businesses, because we have something that is called spaza shops. Spaza shop is your kiosk, your small kiosk in the street, so that you don't have to go to the shops. And we also have got magwinya shops. Magwinya is fat cakes, something that is produced by the elderly people. So there's been a multiple attempt to resolve the question of unemployment.
It's interesting that all these issues that you said, the building of infrastructure, the improvement of the education system, the improvement of the entrepreneurial sector, are also very strong issues in Romania.
Yes.
Is it only a matter of money, of budget involvement in order to develop these, or there is something else needed also?
I think in addition to the money, because you can't just throw money at poverty and at unemployment. In addition to money, you've got to try to change the mindset of people. South Africans, especially the black South Africans, have always sort of depended on jobs or on somebody else giving them employment. So you've got to change the mindset, those in the rural areas, to teach them to make their land productive and to see agriculture even for our youth, because agriculture in our, agricultural studies in our country was undermined, people feeling that it's for people that are not intelligent enough so they can just produce the food. So that mindset has got to be changed.
South Africa and Romania are distant countries physically. How can they still cooperate?
I'm not so sure about the distance from Romania to China. I think that it is longer than to South Africa. So I think once there's commitment on what can be done by two countries, the question of distance becomes a detail and it's not something that can detract. One of the challenges that faces Romania and South Africa is the fact that, in terms of trade, is the fact that Romania tends to be focused in Europe and the EU, the nearer markets, and therefore sees us, especially South Africa, as a very far off place. And yet there's a lot that can be done between Romania and South Africa. Secondly, we have the Durban port that can be linked to Constanța, and we are working on that linkage because Romania can also be an outlet into the rest of Europe, just like South Africa and the Durban port is an outlet into the rest of Africa. So if we brought this, the Constanța and Durban, something that we're trying to do, I think that the question of distance, not only to Romania but to the rest of Europe, so Romania would be helpful in that way.
Also, President Jacob Zuma is pursuing a policy of getting somewhat away from the European Union and the United States and moving closer to the BRICS countries in order to cooperate and develop the economy. Why is this a strategy for South Africa?
I think it's a strategy not only for South Africa, but for the rest of Africa, and indeed for the developing countries. Because for a long time we were told that we are the third world. So there were all these worlds and we're the last one. And we feel as South Africa that we can, for starters, be dependent on other Africans. So the inter-African trade is something that we're promoting very, very strongly. And then saying that within Africa, we've got a lot of these products. And if you look at the raw materials that leave Africa to the so-called developed world, for them to come back as finished products. We think that if you look at our oil, you look at our minerals, you look at our food, all these things, if we learned within Africa to develop and to do the processing from the first stage to the last stage, then we could actually reduce the dependency on Europe. Secondly, we think that the BRICS countries are relatively developed and they've got potential to develop even some more. And therefore, as South Africa, we would like to contribute to that development, but also get from that development. Brazil has moved a long way, and China has moved a long way. So we think that there's a lot that we can learn from each other and use not only for our countries, but also for our regions.
How was your personal life under the apartheid?
That's a difficult one. Personal life under apartheid was not worse than any other African girl growing up in poverty, because I was born in what we call the Mukhuku, which is an informal settlement, places where houses are built with corrugated iron and plastic and so on. And I had no choice in the matter. I just had to be involved in struggle. And this was, I was just a typical girl of apartheid, because my mother, a single mother, my father had died just when I got born, and my mother could not educate me. And I depended on my sister, because my mother was earning very little, and my sister, who had, of course, graduated before me. It was our culture that the older ones educate the younger ones. Then my sister died, and that put paid to my education, because there was nobody to pay any school fees for me. So I was chartered from one relative to another, and I started working at a factory when I was 15, and I never looked back. So by 16, I was already fighting with my boss, my employer, because of the discrimination at the place where I was working. Apartheid did not offer anybody a black person serious opportunities, especially when you were young, especially when, in addition to that, you were very, very poor. Because even amongst black people, there was dire poverty and a little bit better, so there was a classification, not really classes, but you had those that were slightly better than others. And I was lucky enough to be right at the bottom, because the advantage of being at the bottom, then you learned to really appreciate and have values of what it means to be poor and why it cannot be that some have more than others. And it also pushed you to really resist, because besides the question that you were poor, there was this dehumanizing thing, that you were not viewed as a human being, your dignity. And that indignity created this sense of justice. It's not correct. It's not just. I can also do something. And that's what propelled me. So I was in the middle of those activities with many others. Steve Biko.
How old were you at that time?
I was 1976, I was 25. But by this time I was very old because I had already gone to work in the factories and had been kicked out of the factories. I was kicked out of the factories, about 3 factories, and I'd gone to university, got kicked out of the university, and I was now working as a journalist, and immediately thereafter, of course, I was arrested and I was banned.
You were too militant?
Not too militant. I think that I was fighting for a just cause. These things needed to be done. And many people felt, especially in black consciousness, that we've got to start by being proud of who we are before we can. The psychological freedom was very important. And what we did was not only to struggle against apartheid, but we started projects. Black People's Convention, Black People's kind of services. We had all the things that were done by black people. We were going around building houses for black people, telling them how to do houses. Not that we could build us ourselves, but we're doing all these things to raise the pride of black people so that they realize that it is their right, their human right, to have decent houses. We went around teaching where there were no schools. We went around teaching children under trees to then say that it's their right to education, the access. We tried to develop almost a parallel system. When there was apartheid system, we had our own black consciousness system in all kinds of sectors.
After the fall of this system, we would have expected a huge wave of revenge against white people. It didn't happen. Why?
I think that the person who played a critical role in making it a point that we pull back from a racial war again was Nelson Mandela himself. That you could find a Nelson Mandela who went to an armed people in KwaZulu-Natal where there was fighting and then says, throw away those weapons. Throw away those weapons. And people could listen to then say that, okay, fine, we're not going to be killing each other. And it was Nelson Mandela who, within the African National Congress, really persuaded many of us in that organization, many of us not to think of revenge, but to think of unity, to think of building one nation in diversity. And he's the one who said, Ubuntu, not vengeance. Forgive our past, but we don't need to forget it. As Mandela said, that forgive but don't forget, because